Has the semester felt dreadfully long, or has it gone by pretty quick? Spring usually goes like that. Just have to put up a poll to see. Way too quick. Oh, Malachi, appreciate that. Appreciate that. Never spent enough time with you guys. I take that as a compliment. But you'll see here the study guide there is blank. I'm still finalizing it, and I'll have it up this week. And when I do, I will email you guys to let you guys know, not only emailing you with the study guide, and then also just to, let you guys know, hey, it's up. So you guys can start filling it out. And I'm not the kind of professor that is into mind games and guessing games. Here's a list of 1,000 questions. I'm going to pick two and so just figure out, read my mind. And the quiz, the questions that you see on the study guide are questions that you will see on the quiz. So those are that's going to be something for you guys to take a look at there. So just something to pay attention to. All the questions will have been from lectures, from readings. If you're working in groups, that's absolutely fine. If you want to grab a few buddies, whether it's in this class or in a different class, to work through this. But I do encourage you guys, even if you're working in groups, again, to do your own work. And or if you're just, somebody take Genesis, somebody take Leviticus, somebody take Deuteronomy, somebody take Exodus, another person take Numbers. You can knock it out like that as well. And then just, again, share answers across the board. And so as long as you're putting in the work for a section and being able to best enhance your learning, I'm all for it. So again, my priority is your learning, not just your memorization. And so I know some of us were great test takers. We're great at just kind of putting things to short-term memory and being able to recall those things, and other of us have a really hard time with it. And so I want to make sure you guys have enough time to be able to take the quiz. I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like yet. I still need to figure that out with Professor Duzick and figure out if it's something that needs to be. I know some of you need certain accommodations, but if it's going to be an open quiz like I've been having for the class, or if it's something that needs to be timed during class to our finals time. So when I do know, I will let you know. But that being said, are there any questions, comments, concerns? And just as a reminder, again, I'm working on the study guide this week, so I'll be sending this out this week. Any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
If we're doing the final, if we do end up doing the final in class as like a type thing, you and I will need to talk because I have accommodations with that. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, we can figure that out. And I say, and that's why I didn't want to just say like, hey, we're gonna do this and this, because it's still not for certain. Because if it's open, then if you guys have a few days to get it done, then I don't think it's anything to worry about. Kind of like with the quizzes. So you have as much time as you need. So again, I need to talk to Duzick about that specifically, because it's unprecedented time, unprecedented measures. So we'll see what happens. I'm hoping for an extended period of time, because I would just not only give you guys more time to take the quiz, but then also allow you guys to be able to do your best on it. So. All right, any other questions? Comments? Knock knock jokes? Chistes? International jokes, jokes in Spanish? Puns? I missed it. What was the group thing for again? I was saying that if you choose to study in groups, that's absolutely fine. And I somewhat actually encourage it for you guys to work in groups. Just again, when you're working in groups, don't just assign it to one individual and then start handing out the answers. But just again, I strongly encourage cooperation, because then it demands not only you working with other people, but then actually being able to engage in the learning process. And so again, if you're in a group of four other people, I take Genesis, Somebody else takes Leviticus, somebody else takes Exodus, somebody else takes Numbers, somebody else takes Deuteronomy. That's absolutely fine. And you guys just work together on that. And so again, my concern more so is for your learning than it is just for your general rote memorization. So yeah. However you want to work with the group. And again, if they're in another class, that's fine. But do note that probably the only other ones that you'll be able to work with are in the Monday class, because I'm not quite sure what there's a third section of the class and I'm not quite sure what they're doing. So you got it. Yeah, because I know Olivia's in another class. So if you guys wanted to work together on it, that's absolutely fine. And again, if you guys have friends in the Monday class and you guys just want to work on the study guide together, it's going to be the same quiz or the same final. So it'll be fine. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Nobody's got a joke for this Tuesday. That's heartbreaking. All right. Let's go ahead and jump into Deuteronomy for this morning. So last class we had rounded out. Last class we had you guys had a research day, which I'm sure all of you found fruitful for your research and for your thinking and your learning and your knowledge. What's something that you guys did during your time? You go ahead and throw it in the chat, or just unmute yourself and talk.
Our time with what?
Last Thursday.
Oh, I just relaxed, really, because been under a lot of stress this
You're
semester.
supposed to be deep in research, Josh.
I did some research.
Yeah,
I did some research, but like
yeah,
you have to remember, I moved this semester, and I'm still dealing with crap from that. So,
yeah, that's true. There you go.
Yeah, I did do a little bit of studying, but I'm also like,
yeah,
at the pace everything's been going.
Yeah, no, at some point, rest is the most fruitful thing that we do. Like, just got to take it easy. There's too much going on. So, no, I feel you. I'm just messing with you. Mr. Tenny, finished up your surveys. Attaboy. Attaboy. Anybody else? One person? Well, I caught up on grading, so that was good. And did a lot of reading, so that's always a good time. But last Tuesday, what we had rounded out on was talking about at the end, did some schoolwork, then went to work. There you go. Nice. So we had talked about last classes with rounding out the book of Numbers, in looking specifically at how Numbers ends with this fourfold blessing given to Israel from Balaam. In that contrasted with the stories of rebellion littered throughout Numbers 11, 12, 13, 14, and then up to 20. And so we'll talk about why we need to have this, why do we need that context in order to make sense of what's going on in Deuteronomy? Because we need to keep this at the forefront of our minds of what Israel has just gone through and wandering in the wilderness, and how that will lead up to what's going on in Deuteronomy. And so today we'll talk about Deuteronomy, intro to Deuteronomy, and then on Thursday we'll get to Deuteronomy 5 through 11. And so today we're going to be spending our bulk of our time here in the intro. Next semester will be much better because we'll be back in person, no lockdown. Lockdown really messed up a lot of things, especially those of us who are extroverts. Went through personal things, decided to be back in person next semester. Yeah, man. Excited to be back in the room, feel the energy, get the music going again. Be a good time. Great time. Also, you guys got to make sure you guys come through and say hi. I don't know what room I'm going to be in yet, but just come through, say what's up. fist bump, because I don't know if we'll be back to doing much anything else other than waving. But yeah, we'll have to see everybody face to face. But anyway, so getting back to Deuteronomy, Christopher Wright has this quote that Deuteronomy has been described as the heartbeat of the Old Testament. Feel the pulse of Deuteronomy, and you are in a touch with the life and rhythm of the whole Hebrew Bible. In my estimation, not only is Christopher Wright right, but also the fact that so many themes found in Deuteronomy carry over to the rest of the Bible only go to serve to prove that point of how central and how pivotal Deuteronomy is, not just within Israel's imagination, but then also how it serves as this massive building block for how we understand so much of the rest of the Bible, everything from kingship to covenant to exile to Messiah. And then when we get over to Jesus in the New Testament, how Jesus pulls from the Deuteronomy narrative in order to be able to say something not just about himself, but what the gospel writers are applying to Jesus about who Jesus is in the context of Israel's history. And so that being said, doesn't want to work. That what does Deuteronomy mean? That you have the word here in Hebrew, devarim, which means the words. Real fancy, the words. Devar in Hebrew's word, matter, or thing. But here with the im, it's plural, so the words or words. And when we get our word in English, Deuteronomy comes from the Greek, the Septuagint, meaning second law. Second law. Deutero or deuteros in Greek, meaning two or second. And then namas, which is that second word there, the namas, meaning law. Second law. And I'll talk about in a little bit why this is a little bit of a misnomer, a kind of a bit of a misleading way to interpret this specific book because of the way that we understand law to operate, especially in our modern context. That usually we take law to be something as legal, kind of more guiding behaviors or appropriating specific behaviors and prohibiting other ones, or at least providing punishment for other behaviors should they breach the law. But that's not necessarily what Deuteronomy is trying to do by being described as law. And I'll talk about why those differences are pretty significant, especially for Israel. And so the audience is that new generation of Israel. Authorship, Moses and a few others, some editing. And again, the genre is largely legal, but set within the context of narrative. And then we'll talk about some of the themes here. So in Deuteronomy, these words or sayings are a series of speeches or sermons by Moses to the Israelites who are gathered there on the plains of Moab. You'll see here kind of where the arrow's pointing. Right there. You have the Jordan Valley, then the Jordan River right here. That passes through from one side to the other. And it's here that Moses will deliver these speeches, which I'll talk about why I say speeches here in a minute, or sermons here in a minute. But Moses will then kind of deliver those sermons here to the people right before they cross over. So if you were to flip over to the book of Joshua, this is exactly where it picks up on. Their journey from here, plains of Moab, or we might hear steeps of Moab, and then their journey westward. So again, having already wandered around down here somewhere, they then move to the east bank over here, and now are going to begin to move westward. But before they move west, Moses got some words for them. And so the way Deuteronomy is set up structurally is as three sermons in the form of an ancient Near Eastern treaty. Three sermons in the form of an ancient Near Eastern treaty. And so this is going to be important to remember because you may or may not see it on a quiz soon. But you guys always know what that means. You guys don't necessarily need to know the details specifically, but just to know that Deuteronomy is 3 sermons in the form of a treaty. Even if you don't necessarily get the ancient Near Eastern part, just 3 sermons, treaty. 3 sermons, form of a treaty. Okay. How can we describe the structure of Deuteronomy? Come on, you can talk to me.
Three sermons and a treaty.
There you go. 3 sermons in the form of a treaty. Excellent. Excellent. And so what that treaty does look like here, again, this will look a lot like some of the bits and pieces that we find in Exodus. It's just more detailed, and you'll find a lot more elaborations on specific sections like these stipulations. Whereas in Exodus, we really only have 3 or 4 chapters of what are the stipulations that are required for Israel. But here we find what the stipulations are across 14 chapters. Well, even more than that, probably closer to 20, around 20 chapters. General and then detailed. So yeah, the preamble there, historical prologue, stipulations, and then curses and blessings and witnesses. In this part, specifically curses and blessings, I'll spend some time next week talking about that. But that specific section deals with what are the ramifications for keeping or breaking covenant, and that's the really important part to keep in mind, especially when we talk about especially for us being Pentecostals, one of the things that does come up is things like generational curses, things like what's another big one. I forget what the other one was, but there's some semblance here of tying things back to curses, and this comes from this thinking in Deuteronomy, which isn't necessarily the most. It's not the best way to read the text specifically here, coming from Deuteronomy. So again, we'll talk about that when we get there. So some of the things the connections that we do find in the ancient world that is in connection with what we see in Deuteronomy is taken from Hittite suzerain treaties. The Mesopotamians likewise had treaties that looked the same. Canaanites had treaties. Egyptians had treaties. They're common in the ancient world as ways to set up regulations and to set up contracts, expectations between partners, whether it be in business or between families. To know the expectations is very, very important for the survival of a community and the wellness of individuals. And so you'll find some of the same elements here with the preamble, historical prologue. These are the words of Merciless, the great king of the Hittites, the valiant, and some descriptions. That when your father died, did not drop you, since your father mentioned your name to me with such great praise. I sought after you to be sure you were sick and ailing, but I still let you replace your father and accepted your brother, sister, in your land in oath for you. And then you'll have some of the stipulations there. One of the things I do want to bring up about these kinds of texts, because especially as we find out that Israel isn't the only one that does things like enter into covenant. Israel isn't the only one that does sacrifices or has altars. Um, that one of the things for us to keep in mind are not just the fact that Israel is embedded within a context, specifically in history, but then to also recognize some of the differences between what's happening amongst Israel's neighbors and how Israel is, even within using some of the resources available to them, is trying to say something specific about God. And the authors are trying to say something specific about God. And even God is trying to say something specific about himself. And so specifically looking at this list of gods and witnesses, that the sun god of heaven, the sun goddess of Arena, Ishtar, the gods and goddesses of the Hittites, the gods and goddesses of the Amorites, all the olden gods, the mountains, rivers, heaven and earth, the winds and clouds, Let these be witnesses to this treaty and to this oath. And we'll talk a little bit today on monotheism and some of the differences that Deuteronomy not only projects, but also um, portrays within its own context about the nature of other deities and the oneness of Yahweh, the singularity of Yahweh as being the only God. And so you'll notice here the not only the reference to other deities, but when it comes to Israel's literature, much of the time you will have really the only witness between Yahweh and the covenant making between him and his people will be heaven and earth, created elements that he's created, and then himself and the people. Like there's not a lot of other, there's no mention of other deities to pay attention to what's going on there. And so you will have some things going on in the prophets, but that's not necessarily especially relevant here. But again, what Israel is trying to say in the uniqueness, the utter uniqueness of who Yahweh is in the context of this covenant that he's creating right out of this Exodus event, that everything is trying to communicate to the people about this differentness that Yahweh is, this kind of holiness that Yahweh is, um, both in his faithfulness and the way he relates to the people. The covenant is the way that God relates to his people. Covenant is the way that Yahweh relates to his people. And so it's really important for us to not only see this, but then also recognize some of the differences here. Then when we see those elements missing, we got to wonder why. And this is one of the reasons why. Are there any questions about that? Comments, concerns? I don't want to move on from this too quickly because I know for some of us this can be a little problematic to know that Israel isn't the only one that does these kinds of things. Even though you will have found out about them in your cultures class, but just at least allow you the space to be able to talk about it. All right. Well, as I had mentioned before, that you do have the mention of 3 sermons, but in the larger themes of what you have across these 3 sermons are laid out like this. You have the Decalogue or 10 Commandments here, 10 words. You have love, don't forget the call to not forget. You have the mention of love again, Deuteronomy 11, and then what we call the Deuteronomic Code, and I'll talk about that what that is more specifically next week. And then the mention of blessings and curses. So across all these elements are going to be 3 speeches that are scattered, um, that are broken up. But you will notice, particularly what's being mentioned at length, is one, this call to remember, and we'll talk about a little bit today, but mostly for next week, talking about the necessity of memory, especially as it exists in Israel, for them to remember as they're journeying and as they're in the land, which will become a huge problem because more often than not they will forget. And then also the demand or the call for love in 2 chapters and what that can and should look like, which we'll talk about that on more. We'll talk about that more on Thursday. And so there is a little bit of another way to view Deuteronomy, not just as 3 sermons in the form of a treaty or an ancient Near Eastern treaty, but possibly as a chiasm. And you guys will know from your BLE class that you have a chiasm here, that you have this A and A prime, this outer frame, this looking backward and then looking forward at the end, this inner frame of covenant speeches that are here. And in a chiasm, when you guys see that, the reason why it's called a chiasm is because of the letter chi in Greek, and it's usually looks like an X. And so what you see here, what matters most is this central core part, these covenant stipulations from chapter 12 all the way through about 26, so about 14 chapters, that forms the heart of Deuteronomy. So it's another way to read it. That this is what all these elements are leading towards, is trying to get Israel to recognize these covenant stipulations and for them to pay attention to them. So, um, the purpose of Deuteronomy, it's that it's teaching, and this is why I had said earlier that it's a little problematic just to only call it law, um, because we don't necessarily memorize what specific laws are in full detail, nor are we're usually obligated to keep law out of motivations either of fear or just convenience. Like, it's just more convenient not to get in trouble than it is to get in trouble. But with Torah, and again, this is why I brought up that it's meant to be teaching. The image is of a father teaching his children, of a teacher teaching their students. This is Yahweh providing direction, guidance for his people in the way that they ought to go. The Torah is teaching, providing the way for the which way the people ought to go, especially as they're about to enter the promised land. That it's spiritual direction, leading them away from idols, rightly ordering their loves, their passions, telling them which way they ought to orient them. And when we get to Thursday, when we talk about love and loyalty, devotion, what that all means in the context of Deuteronomy, that's in what ways it serves as kind of spiritual directions. Which way ought we to orient our hearts as human beings, as God's people? Which way ought we to go? That it's earthy, not so much that it's super chill, it's calm, but more so that the interests of Deuteronomy very much are concerned with things that are very simple, while at the same time relating to very earthy human things, like being concerned about the land being good, the land being healthy, the land being able to support human life, there being good pastures for animals. That's meant to give new meaning and reappropriate the text. And we'll take a look at this more next week, and we look at some of the Deuteronomic code, specifically of how the situation gets recontextualized for the people now that they've been brought out of Egypt. And we'll look at that specifically with Sabbath, because there's different reasons given for why they ought to observe the Sabbath. And then lastly, that it's meant to teach both individuals and community and the community levels of self-understanding. And this is a really good reminder for us that the Bible isn't just concerned about the nature of faith for individuals. That it's not just, it doesn't just purely view this thing as, well, it's just me and Yahweh. Though there is some concern for individual, what we might call individual faith, that's set within the context of community. And we see that specifically on occasions where an individual's sin affects the entire community. And it's a really good reminder, especially with our hyper individualism, and not just America, but our modern day, especially in America, with our hyper individualism, that the concern for us today is largely like my evangelical emphasis with just a personal relationship with Jesus outside of the context from the community. And that, yeah, I don't really know what they do, don't really participate, kind of go every once in a while. And especially now, with COVID and pandemic and quarantine, all that stuff, it's a little trickier. But one of the things we do need to pay attention to is what the Bible does with balancing out community and individuals. Recognizing that individuals comprise communities and communities are comprised of individuals, and that we need to tend to both. And that it's not just the responsibility of the individual to make changes and to keep covenant obligations, but also the obligation of the community to demonstrate covenant faithfulness as a group. That again, there's responsibility put upon the people to keep Torah, not just individuals. And that's something for us to pay attention to, especially as you're reading through the prophets, because Israel as a whole will be indicted of idolatry. You don't see specific names being mentioned, of individuals like Jimmy, Billy, Janet, Jane, you four, you're in trouble. Exile. Everybody else, you're good. No, all of Israel's taken into exile as a group. Again, which sucks for the people that are innocent and trying to be faithful. But again, the ways in which community is understood, not just as being comprised of individuals, but then also operating in conjunction with amongst individuals. Again, it's a good, excuse me, it's a good reminder for us in the ways in which we tend to think of these kinds of things. And so, um, that it's not just all about just me and my relationship with Jesus, but how are we pursuing Jesus together? And again, that goes well beyond just working at the church and what we're doing. So, that is again one of the things we need to pay attention to. So Deuteronomy and Genesis, that we need to keep some of these things in mind as well, as Deuteronomy relates to Genesis and some of its main theological principles. And we'll see this come up especially in on Thursday. The Elohim, God is one deity and is creator. The God is one deity and is creator. And the second, that and this is more, it serves in conjunction with that, not that it's secondary, it's just more the second point alongside that, is that this universal creator, Elohim, is also the savior, deliverer, Israel, Yahweh. And again, and that's no small point, in that the way in which Israel understands their creator to also be liberator. That the same God who liberates also creates, the same God who creates also liberates. That it's through liberation that Yahweh creates a people for himself. And that's a theme that's not just for the Old Testament, but also comes in the New Testament as well. That if anyone be in Christ, they are a new creation. And all things have passed away, things become new. Again, the same God who liberates also creates. Keep these things in mind. And the human disobedience or sin reintroduces chaos and creates a rift between creator and creation. And that God establishes covenants to reconcile creation unto God's self. So then some themes in Deuteronomy. We're going to go through these themes. Not all these themes need to be memorized, but again, it's going to be good to just pay attention to how many layers there are, not just in Deuteronomy, but how all the strands we've been talking about throughout the semester will start to coalesce within this book in Deuteronomy. So what I want you guys to do is go ahead and get into groups. And I'll go ahead and set you guys in those and read through Deuteronomy 5, 6 through 10, and then 6, 10 through 15, and talk about what does monotheism mean according to these texts. Then are there other actual gods within the text that you'll see these two things being mentioned within these texts. So it's just, you can try to suspend um, your modern definitions of these, but try to allow the text to be able to form what it is that they're saying there. So let me see. Okay. And so for those of you that have your cameras off, just make sure you either turn your cameras on or talk and let your group know that you're there. Don't be weird. And we'll go ahead. We'll get back together. What time is it? Like 6 minutes or so. So, work through this pretty quick. They're not too long. So, and we'll talk about this here in a minute.